All right, moving on now from the podcast, talking about webinars. A webinar or a teleseminar is a seminar that is conducted live over the web, and it is designed to be interactive. Webinars sometimes contain a visual aspect, such as a slideshow, a presentation, or a live stream video. They can be done audio only. Sometimes people, instead of viewing the content online, might be able to call into like a toll-free number and dial into a particular webinar to be able to hear the audio and then view content some other way sometimes. But generally, when we think of webinars, we tend to think of something that's done over the computer, and that there is video that goes along with the audio, whether that audio is from the computer itself or from listening in on a telephone line. How to set up a webinar. When selecting where to host a webinar, one should consider the following factors. First off, the number of attendees. Is it just a few people, or a few hundred people, or a few thousand people? The amount of attendees is going to impact the amount of bandwidth that is being used to help push the product through the internet. So you may have to think about which particular platform you're using to be able to conduct the webinar itself. Second, the visual content. Are you going to be doing just a camera with somebody talking into the camera? Or are you going to have some sort of a PowerPoint presentation showing other types of video or graphics or images? That's going to be a consideration as well. Thirdly, the frequency with which the webinar is held. Is it a one-off sort of thing? Is it a series of like a webinar series talking about one topic over several different webinars, or is it something that's going to happen on a rather consistent, regular basis? All those things are going to be factors in terms of how you set up the logistics of the webinar itself, what service you use, whether it's paid or free. Also things like a lot of times when you're doing free webinar type stuff, there'll be a company logo bug that shows up, or a watermark that displays throughout the webinar. That might be a consideration as well in terms of what you use, whether you want something like that as a part of your webinar stream or not. Webinar hosting sites often allow the creation of multiple choice questions or polls for attendees to answer during the webinar. The poll can provide information about the attendees' general sentiments, as well as giving the webinar participants a feeling of interaction. So it's a great way to get feedback, and it's a great way for people to feel like they're actually a part of what is going on with the webinar. Through the survey, the webinar can also mimic a focus group and provide valuable information to the webinar's creator and participants. So it's a way to kind of survey the audience and be able to get information that may help you in further marketing strategies. Preparing for and executing the webinar. Webinars carry some risks and some dangers. First off, when hosting a webinar, there's really no way to gauge the audience's reaction. You can watch for comments that are coming through as the stream is going on, but it's not necessarily the same as like a face-to-face encounter where you can watch people's body language and be able to see emotion that's coming through. So you do have a little bit of a disadvantage there. Also, webinars, they're done live. There's no chance to re-record if the speaker is stumped or if the speaker misspeaks. So that is something to consider as well. That might be a case where, whenever possible, you want somebody that is very comfortable in doing live presentations, because there's no retakes. It's all going through live. You want to make sure that the person is able to perform under that sort of condition. Webinars need to remain focused on the core content while still providing openings for listener participation and questions. That can be hard to do depending on the subject matter and depending on the participants and the types of questions that are asked. It can be very easy to get off onto a rabbit trail But if you have an agenda in place and you have your talking points and you keep a watch on the time, you should be able to stay focused on the reason that people came to watch the webinar in the first place. Be sure to start on time. If you say that it's going to start at 12 o'clock noon, you better be ready to go at 12 o'clock noon. If people tune in at 12 o'clock and they're sitting there waiting, then they're going to get upset. If you start before 12 o'clock, when you tell people that it starts at 12, they're also going to get upset because they missed content. Start on time. When taking questions, answer them concisely and avoid rambling. It's not an opportunity for you. You want to avoid going off on that rabbit trail. So you want to make sure that you stay on point and that you are directly answering questions. Avoid selling a service or product overtly during the webinar. People attend webinars to learn, not to be marketed to. So again, you're representing a company, you're representing a brand. People know that. They know in large part what types of products and services that you're offering. If they're interested, they'll come back to you in one way or another. But the webinar is not the place to try to hawk those sorts of things. At the conclusion of the webinar, always invite the attendees to make contact with further questions or to connect on networking platforms after the webinar is completed. They make contact with you afterwards, then there may be some actual marketing and selling opportunities for you there because they reach out, they like the content that you made available, so it makes them an even better prospect than they were previously. Marketing with webinars or podcasts. Some of the advantages of using webinars: the ability to gather an enormous audience in a seminar type format without anyone needing to travel. So you are able to host these sorts of things, be able to perhaps get different or larger audiences than if you ask people to come to a specific location. Not to mention there's the logistical costs of having some place to meet if you have to rent a hotel room in an auditorium or something like that. So there's a great advantage in being able to gather people together in this way. Also, the audience can ask questions and get immediate answers during a webinar. As they ask a question, the moderator is able to see that and be able to address that particular question right there live as part of the webinar. Clever social media marketers have also used webinars to gather information about potential clients. Webinars typically require participants to provide an email address in order to participate. So if nothing else, you get the email address where you can use that information to inform people about future webinars or perhaps other things that your brand is doing. I would suggest that you get permission to do that before you use email for those particular purposes that are not directly related to the webinar or the particular thing that was talked about in that webinar where you got that email address from. The primary disadvantage of webinars is that they require planning and coordination beforehand because the event is live and must be attended at that time of its presentation. So you have to kind of have your stuff together. Again, it's live. It's all going out there, whether you're prepared or not, whether you're got your stuff together or not. Make sure you're planned and ready to go. Podcasts, on the other hand, are less interactive because the viewer downloads them and then listens to the file at their own leisure. So on that aspect, there's a more polished presentation that is possible. The interaction is still there in a way in that people can leave comments and things like that, but it doesn't have the immediacy that a webinar has. All right, some best practices. First off, use catchy titles. A great title attracts attention and gives people a reason to read, listen, and attend. Now, you want to make sure when you use a title that the title is relevant to the content that you're providing. A lot of people hate what they call clickbait titles, where a certain title leads people to believe that there's a certain type of content that might be available, and then the content winds up being something that steers them in a different direction. Use a title that is true to the content that you are providing. You can use the title to communicate a benefit, that the title explains what sort of return that a user will get from consuming that content. Another way to use a catchy title is to ask a question in the title, a question that would likely be answered over the course of reading that blog or listening to that podcast or whatever. Finally, be sure to include keywords in the title so that search engines will pick them up. And it's becoming easier to do that across different platforms so that your stuff is searchable and findable and people will come to you. Second, update frequently. Online audiences can quickly lose interest if content is spaced too far apart. Creating content in advance is a good way to make sure you have regular content available to upload. So if you decide that you're doing something on a weekly basis, make sure you do that stuff on a weekly basis and you have that stuff ready to go. If you have a challenge in making sure that you're doing that consistently, you may want to produce several pieces ahead of time and then schedule them to be uploaded at the proper time. Most services will allow the ability to do that in one way or another. Keep content focused. Blog updates should be low. They should cover one topic with sufficient depth, but should avoid using filler or trying to combine several topics into one post. So what we're talking about here is that you don't want too much stuff that you're covering in one particular piece of content. You want to make sure that you keep things to one central theme every time you're putting together a particular episode or a particular blog post. Invite comments. End each post with a question. Create some sort of means for people to be able to interact with you. Questions are a great way to do that. Be sure to reply to comments in order to make readers feel that they are part of the blog, or part of the podcast, or part of the webinar, or part of the live stream, and help shape its direction. Promote the blog, streaming video, podcast, or webinar. It takes effort to be seen in the crowd. Use all the different tools that we've talked about in this chapter in order to talk yourself up. Not just the platform itself that you're using for those different means, but find other platforms and other means of promotion as well. Engage with others. Make thoughtful comments on other relevant blogs or video or audio content and respond to comments that others make. It's a community out there. So just as you're asking people to engage with you, you should engage with others and support things that other content creators are doing. Avoid negativity. It may be true that conflict draws a crowd, but that group is unlikely to become a productive part of the target market. So someone that is rather angry or upset or trying to troll you in one way or another generally is not going to be the person that you're going to have good marketing success with. So avoid inviting those sorts of things. Negative comments also invite others to respond in turn, potentially harming both sides' reputations. It's something to keep in mind there. Stand by your content. Trying to hide the evidence, so to speak, may draw attention to the controversy and make the satisfied viewers even more determined to spread the word about that controversy. If it is necessary to make a correction, consider leaving the original post along with an explanation of why the revision was made. If you're talking about a blog, you can leave the original post and use a strike-through typeface and then type in a correction. If you're doing audio or video, you might put a correction in the comments section or create a new video or piece of audio in order to address that issue and make that correction, and then provide links as appropriate. Cross-promote. Use other social media channels to get the word out about content. Provide as many opportunities as possible for consumers to stumble over that content. Make yourself as easy to find as you possibly can. Archive the content. It is important to have a place where content can be stored and retrieved for those who missed the live event. So make sure that your content is easily accessible, because even though people may not have the luxury of being able to interact in a live sort of way, perhaps there was something memorable that happened, or the information was so valuable that they would be willing to look at it at some other time. Finally, use metrics. Use these tools to track page views, time on site, visits, unique visitors, and some of the tools that you can use are things like Google Analytics, analyzing various posts and comments that are made, the number of reshares that have taken place, tracking your email signups, the subscription to RSS feeds, search ranking, tracking, all these things and more are all going to be great tools for you to be able to help you to see how you're doing and ways that you might want to change things up in order to appeal to your audience even better. All right, one last thing to look at here in this chapter is looking at your own personal brand, how to optimize your online brand by blogging. Some good lessons for you here. First off, find your niche. Again, you don't want to do things that are overly broad and try to cover too many topics. Figure out what you're good at, how you can contribute in the blogosphere, but make it specific. Once you find your niche, reserve it. Reserve the URL, create unique hashtags, Twitter handles, as far as all that goes. That way you can do effective cross-promotion. And that when people are comparing things across platforms, it's a apples-to-apples sort of comparison. Create meaningful blog content for your audience. Determine the target audience for your blog and create meaningful content accordingly. One way to do this is create a persona and look into where that type of person hangs out online. Again, know your target audience. Observe good formatting rules. People process information in bits and bytes, so by using small paragraphs, headings, and subheadings, your content will easily be digestible. Don't make people have to search through jumbled paragraphs and large, 50-cent words and that sort of thing, unless the type of content that you're presenting commands that certain type of audience. If you're trying to appeal to Joe Schmo on the internet, make sure your content is easy to read and easy to understand. Blog regularly. Use email signups so that those who are interested know when you have a new blog coming on stream. Have a rhythm so that readers know when to expect content. Again, have a schedule. Stick to it and be accountable to that schedule. Promote your blog. Respond to your audience. Keep an eye on the comments on your posts so that you can remain in charge of the content that shows up there. Don't be afraid of the negative stuff that comes through. Make sure you respond to it and respond to it authentically. Finally, use metrics to refine the approach. You may find that certain topics get more hits or comments from your audience. Use that information to help in creation of future content. So that's the notes for Chapter 7. Make sure you check out the study questions on Blackboard and be ready to talk about things in class.